come from, peace is very much in the air. On Broadway, Oslo has just won the Emmy for the best play of the year. And in Washington, ahead of Jared Kushner's arrival here on the latest round of efforts to make peace, President Trump's spokesman issued the statement saying that he is convinced and has made clear that a lasting peace between Israelis and Palestinians is possible. The air may feel and sound very different here in Tel Aviv, and I am extremely honored to have 4 veterans of the peace process who are here to share with us their views on the legacies and the lessons of that peace process. You have their bios. You can read them. I want to reserve most of the time to listening to them and letting them talk. But Itamar Rabinovich, I'm going to ask each of them to start with a 4-minute, roughly, presentation of the lessons that he has drawn from his experience with the peace process. I start with Itamar Rabinovich, best known to everyone in this room. Thank you.
Good afternoon or evening, everybody, and Judith, thank you. In 4 minutes, I'm going to make 3 points regarding not just the peace process, but the U.S. Role. Point number 1, only the U.S. can. Others have aspired, others have tried, be it the Europeans, be it the Russians, being the Turks, who mediated under Olmert between Israel and Syria. But going back to late 1973, at the end of the Yom Kippur War, the beginning of what we call the peace process, to the present, the only external power who has been able to facilitate, orchestrate, oversee, and bring to conclusion and underwrite Arab-Israeli negotiations and agreements has been the United States, and I don't think this has changed. Second point, this needs to be done at the highest level. Now, Israelis and Arabs are spoiled. Others do not have the privilege of having the United States, presidents, secretaries of state, and so forth, devote that much time, energy, and political capital to trying to sort out their problems. If you live in Cyprus, if you live in Nagorno-Karabakh or in other parts of the world, you have not enjoyed that privilege. But the United States does it, and oftentimes at the highest level. And what we've found out that it was Kissinger, but it was Kissinger with Nixon behind him, and when necessary, the phone call from Nixon to the Prime Minister of Israel did arrive. It was Secretary Christopher, but it was Bill Clinton. It came David, Jimmy Carter himself did the heavy lifting, and so on and so forth. It doesn't always work. It's not a guarantee for success, but without it, it won't work out. Just to nominate a special emissary, as sometimes has happened the case, Mitchell, others proved to be unsuccessful. So this needs to be the formula. Not the president himself or herself, but a senior official in the administration with a close supervision and support of the president himself. Thirdly, a very important issue of timing. When does the United States need to enter the picture? And the point I'd like to make very strongly is not too early. Successful cases, the Israeli-Egyptian peace began between Israelis and Egyptians. Initial reaction by the Carter administration, negative, but then it came in and played a crucial role. Camp David would not have been signed but for Jimmy Carter. Oslo began as a track 2 between Israelis and Palestinians in order to be brought to conclusion, to be put on the world stage, and to at least be launched, if not fully successfully. It took the Washington signing ceremony and so forth. When the United States enters the picture too early, the peace process becomes a mediation conducted by the United States. And a mediation, certainly from an Israeli point of view, is less desirable because at that point, the interest of the mediator, the need to be successful, and so forth come into being. The Arab party normally prefers to the United States to mediate than to engage directly with the Israelis. I can understand that, but I think for the good of the process, certainly from an Israeli point of view, not a mediation, the United States coming in at the right point, not too early, helping to bring it to conclusion, and then to underwrite it. Thank you.
Thank you. Perfectly on time. For those of you who have never been in the room and have heard Gamal, watched Gamal in action, you know that he is far more than merely a translator. Gamal, you have some thoughts, I'm sure, on your experiences trying to translate peace in various languages. Can you share with us, please?
Probably the last 20, 25 years working with 4 American presidents. Each one of them contributed differently to the peace process. The U.S. will always have indispensable role to play. However, that role needs to be calibrated. Each president will define that role. How much would his administration invest in the peace process? And we've seen presidents who actually put a lot of energy, and we've seen presidents that basically chose to step aside and wait. The U.S. role when it comes to mediating Middle East peace will have certain requirements. I think Itamar alluded to some of them. You really have to have an American president who is interested in it, and he sees that it's a part of U.S. national security. If that is the case, you will also need an Israeli prime minister who will be at least willing to try. We've seen some who are very much dedicated to the idea, and we have seen Israeli prime ministers who are not interested in it. Then after that, you really need to size the role of the U.S. Sometimes when you are mediating, it is very thin line between being a part of the solution and a part of the problem. The two sides usually, or all sides, will try to take advantage of U.S. mediation, and each one would like the U.S. team to be their lawyer. We have certain historic relationships as the United States government, certainly with the state of Israel, and every American president that I've served demonstrated clearly his commitment to that role. But at the same time, we try to see if we can have the Arab side to play a constructive role in peace mediation. One of the things that every Secretary of State or every president was trying to do is how much do you get involved, and when do you present ideas, how forcefully you present those ideas, because among all the administrations that I've worked with, there is a very solid conviction that the real agreement will have to be negotiated by the two sides who are negotiating this, if the U.S. cannot impose peace on anyone. And the simple explanation is that we're not the ones who are going to live together. They are the parties who will live together. One of the problems sometimes when you mediate is you don't realize when to stop or when to take a break from it. If you're not prepared to walk away from it, then it's a problem for the United States. If you are not, if you project an image that you have more stake in it than the parties themselves, then you also have another problem. And we've seen that over the years. The bottom line is the U.S. role is indispensable. However, any U.S. president will have to be very clear in terms of how much they will try to do, how much political capital they are willing to spend, and what kind of a role the U.S. will play. Would it be a constructive role, or would it be not so constructive? Most of the presidents that I was privileged to serve, they tried to be a part of the solution, not a part of the problem. Sometimes it didn't work that way. I think the U.S. role in peace negotiations in general was shaped by President Sadat. He's the one who said 99% of the cards in the hands of the U.S. And therefore, the U.S. inherited that role since the 70s and continued to play. Sometime down the road, probably we'll say more about it.
Okay, thank you. Ziad, talk about the triumph of hope over experience. Tell us a little bit about your personal observations from this.
Thank you, Judy. It is a pleasure to be with all of you. I have lessons that I want to focus on about the nature of the conflict and the lessons to be learned, and more importantly, at the end, how to use these lessons in planning out the future, if there is such a thing. The nature of the conflict has changed from one that was eventually defined by the Arab-Israeli conflict, concluding with the 3 no's in Khartoum, where the Palestinians were not even present, to gradually, after history was created, to something that's come to be called the Palestinian-Israeli peace process. The Palestinian peace process has dominated the scene for decades right now. It was a conflict between 2 uneven partners who have been separated further by the disparity of power over time. The negotiations have not failed between the Palestinians and the Israelis for no reason. They have failed for very serious reasons, and have failed despite very serious attempts by the indispensable partner, the U.S. and its leadership, because there were no agreements fundamentally on strategic choices for either the Palestinians and the Israelis. Right now, we still live during this phase of this disparity and the dysfunctionality of the systems, both in Israel and in Palestine, to withhold the veto that opponents to the understandings have exercised continuously and frustrated any effort at solutions. The negotiations have failed, of course, for many reasons, but fundamentally I would say there has been no noticeable improvement for the people on the ground throughout the periods of negotiations. This added much to the loss of confidence and credibility of the process. The Palestinians continued to live miserably, and negotiations or no negotiations, and they have lost faith in their own establishment, let alone in the process of negotiations with the Israelis. And we have now to look at that in itself as a component to be changed. Negotiations are necessary, indispensable. There is no other way. But what are we negotiating about? I think therein lies a very serious issue that is worth considering, and I will comment about it further, but it has something to do with the improving the abilities of the negotiators, first in the right of representation, which is now hard to get with a divided polity, into a advocacy of a solution that is actually achievable and supported by palpable experience on the ground by the people. The other factor that I think has changed tremendously is the region. Fast forward from '67 to the Arab Spring, the role of the Arabs has been pretty much marginal. And now, after the Arab Springs, the Arab system has become a problem in and of itself. And you can no more separate the problems of Syria or Iraq or Libya or Palestine, etc., and come up with a package for that one state alone. So there is an interconnectedness, interdigitation between the various state issues that require same vision to resolve strategically and different tools than the ones that have been used. Of course, this may take us to grounds that are in dreamland right now, like a strategic alliance on security, out of which other things would grow. But for the present time, it is important to notice that this is a change that was not a necessary component to dealing with Palestine-Israel as a process. I think the last item I would like to bring is that the Palestinian people have grown more frustrated with time, and less empowered, and they have not had an opportunity, actually a real opportunity to contribute to the solution. The move forward has to improve the living conditions of the Palestinians. It's already late. Yesterday would have been just fine. And this is a negotiated issue. I submit that what we need now to discuss for negotiations, instead of what has been discussed so far, is to stay away from final status resolutions. I know this is blasphemy for some, but what needs to be focused is to study in the process of negotiations what are the factors that have impeded agreement so far. All the factors that have made the Palestinian life miserable, including the lack of major political process. This has to be part of empowerment of the Palestinians, which I think is necessary for stability and the solution.
David Makovsky.
Thank you, Judy. And it's an honor to be with my friends here, these panelists. I'm going to try to be very direct and in keeping with Israel's style of Dugri. Look, the United States really internalized an Arab critique of American peacemaking in the 90s, which is that it was incremental. And yes, part of it was mandated by Oslo itself, it should be pointed out, but it was go for the end game. Try to do it all. To put it in American terms, which won't mean anything to Israelis, try to hit the home run ball. Solve the whole conflict. And what people forget is the United States internalized the Arab critique 3 times. 2000, Bill Clinton, the effort at Camp David, the last 6 months of his presidency. It even went on a little after Clinton was president in Taba. Second time, Condoleezza Rice at Annapolis, follow-on talks with Abbas and Olmert that went all the way from November 2007 through 2008. And the third time, which I should disclose I was part of, the Kerry Initiative, 2013-2014. What defined these 3 efforts was the American peacemaking really to go for the whole, solve the whole thing, do it all at once. We took that seriously, that incrementalism had its own downsides, maintaining coalitions on both sides. There's a lot of reasons that were put forward. But I would like to say that having tried 3 times to do the whole thing, Albert Einstein's view of insanity, do the whole thing again, expect a different result. And people say, well, the region is different, and I'm sure we'll talk about where can we do going forward, because I think it's crucial that something is done, and I don't want anything to be interpreted that makes me sound like I like the status quo. But I must say, and I'm being very direct, because of this manish tana factor of what would be different, is that we have to be honest that we have leaders, the leadership constraints on the ground here is that we have 2 very risk-averse leaders. And my takeaway from the Kerry period is, out of the 5 core issues, the borders, security arrangements, Jerusalem, refugees, the 5th, mutual recognition, do you accept the character of the other side's state, that we were 2 of those 5. I think we had the makings of a potential breakthrough, which the leaders themselves won't talk about to their own publics. But the other 3, Jerusalem, security, and the mutual recognition, I don't think we were close. We tried the front door, the side door, the back door, the window, the basement, the chimney. We didn't want any doctoral student at IDC to write a dissertation. Were the Americans creative enough in 2013 and 14? We saw this as the most intensive involvement of the United States to solve this problem. So my view is we didn't have a Sadat, maybe that they had then, and we didn't have a Begin. We had 2 risk-averse leaders, and if we don't have that, where the Venn diagram and their positions overlap, it's hard to tell America, try it a 4th time. So my takeaway is, don't try to hit the home run, try to hit a single, try to do less, but to succeed, because we have a culture of public disbelief that every time we fail, there's a cost in terms of America's prestige and its ability to persuade others. So we need something that has a strong chance of success. And that, to me, means trying to do less than the grand deal, but to succeed at it, which I'm sure we'll talk about in terms of going forward. But I just feel what's missing in Israel, and it's painful maybe to talk about this, because you're going to say, well, why get into this debate if we don't have the grand deal at the doorstep? But the problem is, what we learned the last 3 times is when you're in the deal, the leaders still don't talk publicly about it. And that is on security arrangements in the Jordan Valley, Jerusalem. Is there a willingness to make those compromises that that need to be made or not? Because without the public support, these leaders we have now are not going to do it. And they might not even do it with the public support. So does that mean we have to wait for a new set of leaders? I don't know. I think there are things you could do now under the rubric of 2 states for 2 peoples, of partial moves that are critical that would make a dent in this culture of disbelief. But to tell America, try a 4th time without any reason to make us believe that we're going to succeed in a way that we didn't succeed last time, I fear is not enough. So we have to learn from the past. It wasn't that the U.S. wasn't imaginative enough, is that we don't have leaders that were willing to go forward. Now, someone will say, well, just impose it. Let America impose. But I believe that this is an existential enough issue to both publics that if they're not committed to this, they'll find a way to unravel it. So it's easy to tell America, you do the heavy lifting for us because we can't do it ourselves. But it will become unstuck if the leaders and the publics are not committed. And that might require more public debates here, even if final status is not in the offing tomorrow morning.
Thank you very much for opening comments. I want to start by pointing out that it seems to me, David and Ziad, you're both arguing for going for less than the home run. You said, let's not tackle, the final solution now. But I hear Itamar say that timing of American involvement is really important. I guess the question I have for this panel is, 1, is Donald Trump starting too soon, given this situation on the ground? And 2, with these current set of leaders, does it make any sense to really start if the public on both sides seems to be adverse to the kind of overall deal that Mr. Trump thinks is actually not only possible but essential? Itamar, you want to start?
Yeah. First of all, we don't have to speculate. He started of his own volition. It's not the case of the Israelis enticing him to do it or others. He decided in and of himself what he defined the ultimate deal. I think with his instincts, he identified that this is an issue that resonates, and that if you compare, we think that the Israeli-Palestinian issue is very complex, but if you compare it to other challenges like the North Korean issue and so forth, it may be an issue in which he can score a success. That success would resonate domestically in the States and internationally, and this is why he defined it as the ultimate deal and started. I think that what we see is deceptive. We don't hear noises. I think he learned the lessons from Obama's failure. Obama began with an open row with Netanyahu that didn't go very far, and I think it begins quietly, but at some point I think the differences of opinion will surface, and we'll see much more visibly what we fail to see now. I fully agree with the 2 colleagues who advocated less than the full deal. I don't think that the final status agreement is feasible right now, but I do think that the status quo is unacceptable, that there is no status quo. We are drifting towards one statehood, and arresting that process is essential for us, and I think Trump can do it. From my point of view, even if he generates a more limited process and puts it in place and stops the deterioration towards one statehood, that would be quite good and admirable. So it's not too early. I think it's feasible. I think that one of his assets is that he's unpredictable, that people, including leaders here, are afraid of him. He can translate that into diplomatic assets, and I wish him success.
Gamal, do you have a view on that?
I think enthusiasm is not enough, frankly. for the United States to play an effective role. There is a reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground today is different than the reality that we dealt with 17 years ago or 20 years ago. In the old days, we used to talk about permanent status issues, the ones that David just mentioned, Jerusalem, security, the land, and so on. I think the new administration will have to understand that the reality as it exists today on the ground is different. I would argue that the biggest loser throughout the last 20 years basically was the peace constituency on both sides, the Palestinians and the Israelis. You don't really have much of a peace constituency now that could rally behind its leader, either on the Israeli side or the Palestinian side. In addition to that, one of the main components of a peace deal between the Palestinians and the Israelis will be land. And that's an issue that it is right now highly questionable. Some colleagues argue over, let's do a step-by-step small deals. Others could argue that the two sides exhausted enough time going step by step, and it's got to be a bigger deal. I am usually try to be optimistic, but frankly, I'm not. If the Trump administration would like to play a role here, it has to be based on the reality as it exists on both sides. If they continue to recite the same permanent status issues that we failed to reach an agreement on, either Jerusalem or territories or refugees or all five of them, it's not going to be realistic. Should we just simply wash our hands off the process? No. But I think there is a component that has to be included in any new efforts, and that is the regional dimension. I would argue that we actually failed during the last 20 years to have more regional involvement to make them a part of this, either a part of the problem or a part of the solution. Many of the Arab countries were dragging their feet, basically. But I think the new administration should ask for more in order to create new constituency for peace. On the Palestinian side, on the Israeli side, you need to have much more visible regional role. The U.S. by itself is not enough, but I think if you have the Gulf states, other North African states, being a part of this and clarifying what exactly they will contribute to these efforts, I think that could inject some hope into the new efforts. But going back to the same old issues, which we failed to achieve anything, using the same old techniques, I don't think it will lead to anything. And in terms of going step by step, people exhausted, at least on the Palestinian side. They've been there, they've done that. 20 years passed and nothing happened. Things today, they will say they are worse than before. And on the Israeli side, people still are not very enthusiastic about this idea. They don't believe that it could happen. The two sides over the last 20 years try to do it on the cheap. And by saying this, I mean there is a cost that it is involved in this, on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian and the Arab side. And just being close to the negotiations for all those years, I did not feel that both sides were willing to pay the high cost of peace. So I wish them good luck. I just don't know if they will reach anything.
Ziad or David, would either of you agree or disagree with that?
Yes. There are two big things actually up for discussion about the future. One is still the Palestinian-Israeli issue, and the other is the regional issue that has emerged recently. And the real creative thinking is not to go to the Arabs and ask them, how can you help us with the Palestinian issue? It is to go to everybody in the region and say, how can we create a security system in the region that is fundamentally similar to what happened in Europe after the Second World War, with NATO and the Marshall Plan, et cetera, where everybody gets security with the ultimate guarantee of the American system, which is indispensable. If we look at the conflict differently in this context, then the avenues of conversation is different. The discussion will change. And this issue, which seemed so large for decades, becomes, like one more variable in a system to be born and resolved. On the Palestine-Israel particularly, I would like to add that the negotiations are indispensable, just as is indispensable as the American intervention in this. Now, what do we negotiate about? What has not worked so far now is this continuous quest for a final status resolution, agreement on final status. Well, it's just not possible amongst neither the present two governments or the population that exactly is going the other direction. So we need to negotiate about the transition out of these obstacles that have prevented, which means a lot of them have to do with the Palestinian way of life. A lot of them have to do with the impact of that on Israeli politics. We lost the peace camp. Absolutely, we lost the peace camp. And the peace camp is not just not we lost. The very concept of stabilization and coexistence depends on links developed between the Palestinians and the Israelis in the first place and others in the region. So a major effort has to be a joint subject of negotiations as how do we improve things. Israel has to normalize the relation with the Palestinian people, and it is in its hand how to do that. Everybody talks about normalization for the Palestinians as a nefarious concept. How do you surrender and sell out and accept normalization? Normalization is a two-way street, and that is a subject of conversations, for instance. Also, the other concept is beautifying the occupation by doing anything good, for health or education or success. What a noxious concept. We have to, tell the Palestinian people, we're improving your education, your roads, your governance, your commitment to law and order. How is this bad for you? If we present it this way, which is the truth, then of course you have a much more engaged and supportive Palestinian population for whatever the leadership is trying to do to establish links. I think these are two areas that need more attention.
Okay,
David.
I do agree with something Itamar said about Trump and implying that the leverage is now. I mean, there is a window. Nobody wants to say no to President Trump at this moment. This could change if his investigation in America gets more protracted in some way. The Arabs do want to keep, the Arab states want to keep Trump in the region. They want him to focus on Iran. Does that mean there could be some quid pro quos on this issue? Netanyahu, who had his problems with Obama, doesn't want to be seen by the Israeli public that he's the problem. He's going to want to do whatever he can to make sure he gets along with Trump, because if he has problems with both a Democrat and a Republican president, what does that say about him? So in a certain way, there is a window here of American leverage. The question for me is, I'm sorry again to be relentlessly practical about this, because I desperately want to see a success. I don't believe we're in the era of heroic leaders like we were with Sadat and Begin. So it's the public that's going to have to help be part of a changed reality. But they have to see also, they could help change reality if they also see a reality can really change. Otherwise, they'll just feel they're knocking their heads against the wall. So what is that relentless practicality, the single, so to speak? It seems to me what it means is responding to the fears on both sides and the kishkas of each side about the other. That you might not get at the destination, but you have a direction towards it. If you look at Palestinian polling, 80% in the Khalil Shikaki polls say that Israel went to all of the West Bank. What if, and so for them the animating principle is land. They think Israel is doing creeping annexation. And so therefore, the point here is address that fear, saying you're not going to build outside the blocks, outside the barrier. No more. You won't even try to claim that in sovereignty and final status. Most people focus, even the prime minister in a Knesset speech says it's about the blocks. Well, then don't build outside that, because that undermines all confidence. The Israeli fear often is incitement. What are you teaching your children in schools and that? And here I think not paying families of terrorists financial incentives could be an effort to say, oh, they're actually doing something on that issue. Because that also relates to security, which is also in the Israeli kishkas. So there has to be, each side takes at least one step that is dramatic on some level that convinces, oh, wow, he is serious. I got to start paying attention. And I think here the Arab states, as some of my colleagues have suggested, you know, here the Trump administration has to line up the Arab states and say, look, if I get this one step from the Israelis and I get one step from the Palestinians, I need a step from you. And if it's business visas to the Gulf or telecommunications or overflights. But the Trump administration hasn't really worked the Arab side of the street yet. Yes, it went to Riyadh, but that was a lot about arms sales, that was about al-Qaeda, that was about Iran. It wasn't on this issue. So you've got to line up your ducks. But the most important thing for me is, and here I hope I don't sound Trumpian, but we need a success, because there's this culture of disbelief on both Palestinian and Israeli public sides. Nothing is possible. The other side isn't a partner. It's hopeless. It's going nowhere. And that will just be a downward spiral further. I think we have to reverse that spiral.
Itamar.
I'd like to address the regional dimension. First of all, we must realize the region has changed. 20, 30 years ago, people almost equated the Arab world with Middle East. It's no longer the case. Iran and Turkey are major players. In the case of Iran, very destructive. In the case of Turkey, partially destructive, but both are involved in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and not in good ways. Second, the United States, the Trump administration, is tested by the Arabs on its performance on other issues. It just became more involved in Syria. Is it going to deliver, or is it going to play second fiddle to Russia? People are looking to see whether the Trump administration is a credible partner and ally, or whether this is a very sort of flip-flop president who today is interested and tomorrow may lose interest. Thirdly, in terms of the Arab motivation, this is perhaps the most I would say, adequate, satisfactory, attractive context. There is a great deal of interest and will, at least in the Sunni Arab world, to participate or to help resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in order to proceed in cooperation with Israel and with the business that is more urgent in their eyes. So ideally, what is called regional peace cannot substitute the essence of the issue, that is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the need to resolve it, or at least put it on track. The other Arab states, Saudi Arabia and others, can be counted upon in two ways. One is to help, to encourage. Remember that Camp David 2000 failed also because Arafat did not receive Arab support for concessions he had to make on issues like Jerusalem that are not merely Palestinian. And secondly, in terms of what they can expand the pie. They can make concessions and gestures to Israel that would make up for concessions that the Palestinians are hard put to put. In other words, as in timing, here what is required is a precise calibration of where and how you bring the rest of the region into the picture. It can be an asset, but it could also remain an obstacle.
Gamal, you have a thought on that?
I think there's a difference between creating a leverage and using it. I think the Trump administration so far is pretty good when it comes to creating a leverage, but it's yet to be seen if they really will be able to use it or not. I mentioned, so was my colleagues also, the idea of regional participation. I think when I look at the peace process, when I look at the Palestinian side and the Israeli side and the loss of peace constituency, it reminds me of what President Sadat did. I think the idea of generating and creating a new momentum that goes above the heads of the two governments on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side might be actually useful here. I can imagine, for example, if the administration will be willing to mobilize the region, where the idea of dealing with the state of Israel will not start with the signing of an agreement, but will start with the beginning of a process. I think it will create a new dynamics. And frankly, over the last 20 years, we should have done that as various U.S. administrations, but we didn't. We accepted the argument that you reach a peace agreement first, you sign it, then actual peace will come. I don't believe in this argument anymore. I think it should be a part of creating the new environment and a new momentum. Either you will go for a full deal or step by step or whatever new momentum you're going to create for peace. I think there has to be regional participation, and that regional participation starts with day one. It does not start with the signing, but it starts with the initial steps that will be taken. If you don't do that, then you won't really have a constituency that's willing to fight for the idea of achieving peace, or even the idea of, frankly, coexistence at one point.
Just to clarify, you mean asking the Arabs to make
Yes.
take a step before or as the process begins?
As a part of the process.
Right now,
with the beginning, with the initial meetings that the parties will take, I think it has to be a clear, not gesture, but actual process of dealing between the Arab side and the Israeli side. Without that, I don't think there will be much credibility that these efforts will produce anything. We could have done it with the Syrian track, and Itamar is here, and probably would have made a difference by now. We could have done it with the Palestinian track at various stages, and it would have made a difference. But unfortunately, it never happened.
Itamar, do you think that's possible?
On the Palestinian,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
What about the Arab?
Yeah. Now, since Gamal mentioned Syria, I think Ziad said about regional system of regional security. I'm afraid no one is going to take this phrase seriously when for 6 years now the Syrian civil war has raged, has exacted the course it has exacted, and it seems nowhere near an end or a solution. So people, I don't think will have faith in that.
That's part of the reason why we don't have a solution.
Yeah.
What could you?
That's part of the reason that we don't have a solution. It is not possible to solve Palestine, Israel by itself, no matter how much goodwill you bring and competence on the part of the leadership, which is not a good statement to say about the truth. But even with that, now this is part of a complicated region, and it will need regional solutions. It may take a long time to put this kind of solution together, but it is indispensable. And people will get used to the idea when they start thinking of the practicalities of it, not of the ideology.
Yeah. Since we started talking about the Trump administration, let me say this. I think what Americans, the region, the world want to see is a comprehensive approach. What we have seen so far is a set of discrete steps, statements, actions that don't necessarily fit into a comprehensive view. I think the administration came in with a sense that it should begin a comprehensive policy with a grand bargain with Russia. That, of course, is on the rocks right now, because as long as the president is investigated for his relations with Russia or collusion with Russia, this is not feasible. And there is a clear absence of a comprehensive strategy. And it also relates to the region. There is certain policy in Syria, there's a relationship with Saudi Arabia, Turkey, presumably a NATO member and ally. There's huge tension over the Kurdish issue in Syria. Qatar, on one hand, American allies are fighting with Qatar. At the same time, there is a very significant American airbase in Qatar. It doesn't make sense as a system. And my first recommendation would be, theoretically or hypothetically, gentlemen or ladies and gentlemen, please try to introduce system and comprehensiveness into this.
Yes, Dave.
Yeah, I don't know if Itamar and I were thinking on the same wavelength. I mean, I would draw the distinction between comprehensive an approach of drawing in a lot of Arab state players to create the impact that Gamal was referring to, and maybe even dealing with governance issues that Ziad was referring to. But if comprehensive means pushing the final status issues tomorrow, so we're once again, talking about the old city of Jerusalem, it's all or nothing, and in the Middle East, all or nothing means nothing. So my view is to try to find a way to actually be comprehensive in terms of the number of players we try to bring to the table to make progress. But I'd rather see partial progress than an all or nothing hope that crashes a fourth time. And so I just think there's a lot of choreography, and if that's what Itamar meant, then I think I'm in full agreement.
Let me correct the impression. When I used the term comprehensive, it was not in the Israeli-Palestinian context, not a quest for a comprehensive settlement. I did say, at this point, I think we have to go for, call it a sophisticated interim agreement. Comprehensive means a comprehensive American approach to the Middle East, where policy in Iraq, in Syria, and in the Arabian Peninsula all fit together into something that makes sense.
I agree. I definitely agree with that.
One thing I would like to mention before this panel is over is the issue of good governance in Palestine. It sounds like somewhat not exactly a practical thing to do and nebulous, and it's not very convenient, frankly. Well, it happens to be something that the Palestinians desperately need if anybody is going to move on a historic process or about their future. They do not believe that this is possible as long as they're living like this with nobody letting up. Neither the Israeli occupation nor the Palestinian government is giving the Palestinian people a break. And that is precisely because of the absence of good governance, along with the occupation that we talked about. So this has in itself to be a subject of negotiations. And I don't just mean bilateral Israeli-Palestinian relations. I mean this is part of the United States' new approach to the region, which I am very excited about the fact that the president is interested in this subject. This is the major requirement of our time, is to have a president who really is committed to this. And, in the land of miracles, serial miracles, even miracles have to be built. If they build any structures, they have to build them on sound foundations.
I just want to, but given the fact that you were actually talking about negotiations with a divided Palestine, how on earth does this make any sense at this point? And you have the Hamas and the PA. I mean, we're going to just pretend that the reconciliation is
for Hamas,
real.
I would just, for practical purposes, say, leave them alone. Leave them alone for the practical. There is nobody with a key to the Hamas problem now.
Does anyone disagree with that? Okay, we have unanimity on that. We have 4 minutes left, for almost 5 minutes. I'd like each of you to give one piece of advice to Donald Trump and Jared Kushner et al. About what to do and what not to do as he enters this real estate deal, as he's described it to other people. Itamar, starting with you.
Yeah. What we have seen so far, I think we have seen two promising elements. One is discreteness. The discussions between Trump and Netanyahu and Abu Mazen have been kept secret. Nothing leaked out. We know practically nothing.
No tweets.
Oliver tweet, yes. So that, I think, needs to be maintained. I think there's been a right balance between initiative, leadership taken by the president and assigning the actual negotiation to junior level or more junior levels, quite close to him, but still not himself. His own prestige has not been involved. What I think we don't see is the full machinery of the American government at work. State Department is understaffed. We don't know exactly division of labor between White House, State Department, Pentagon, CIA, and the fourth. This needs to be put into place. There has to be the full machinery before the United States can be fully effective.
I will tell the Trump administration is that when we talk about the future, the word future actually in the Arab mind means a little bit different. It means go back to the past, correct the injustice of the past, then we can talk about the future and the plans for the future. For 20 years we talked about the future, but the mindset in the Arab world was always focused on going back to correct the injustice of the past. The second point I would say is that we're talking about historic conflict. It's not a real estate deal. Every stone, every piece of land has a long history. And at the end of the day, the Middle East, the way I look at it, it is basically the Middle Ages with an iPad.
Okay. We've been asked to cut it really, really short, so 30 seconds each. Yes, David.
All right. Look, enthusiasm isn't enough, would be my prescription. You're dealing with leaders in Netanyahu and Abbas who live the conflict. They know every element of it. In some ways, and I don't mean to be disrespectful, but they're sharks. And they know the loopholes. And if you have right now, the State Department is a ghost town. You haven't filled virtually any of the senior positions. You need people who know the conflict as well as they do. You're not going to be able to do it as the president. You've got other things on your mind. But it's not enough to tweet, and it's not enough to be enthusiastic. When you get into the details, these guys are pros, and you're going to have to be able to keep up with them step for step. There's just no shortcuts. If there's one line, no shortcuts.
Okay.
I would say, first, congratulations on tackling this very intractable problems. This is the right time. Secondly, you need to add credibility by anything you do, by getting support from the people and impacting the public discourse as well as the palpable realities on the ground as you move on.
Thank you, gentlemen, and thank you very much, audience, for your attention.